Under a swollen moon, the desert breathed in silence, holding its secrets close. The wind carried the scent of smoke and sagebrush, and somewhere beyond the ridges, the echo of gunfire trembled against the stars. Ishta, 20 years old and heavy with child, stumbled through the dust. Her shawl, torn and darkened with her husband's blood, clung to her shoulders like a ghost refusing to let go. Each step was a prayer, each breath a fragile bargain with life. Behind her, the world she knew burned. Her tribe had been ambushed by bandits who came with greed in their eyes and fire on their tongues. Her husband had fallen before her, his last breath spent shielding her. Now there was only the endless plain, and the ache of survival driving her forward. Through the blur of pain a light appeared, a faint, trembling glow, distant as hope itself. She followed it, half crawling, half walking, until the shape of a small cabin rose from the night. The wood seemed carved out of loneliness, its windows flickering with the dull pulse of firelight. She reached the door and knocked weakly, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, my baby is coming." The door creaked open to reveal a man, a giant of a cowboy, 30 years old, with shoulders broad enough to carry the horizon. Cole Braddock's face was lined by years of sun and silence. His eyes, gray like winter rivers, studied her with wary compassion. He had not spoken to another soul in weeks. The desert had long ago made him part of its stillness. Yet when he saw her, a stranger trembling in the doorway, the outline of her belly clear in the lamplight, something inside him stirred. Without a word, he stepped aside. Ishta crossed the threshold, collapsing against the worn table. The cabin smelled of pine, smoke, and solitude. Cole's voice was low, unsure. "Sit. I'll fetch water." He moved with deliberate calm, though his pulse raced beneath his rough hands. He had seen gunfights, storms, the death of cattle in drought, but never this kind of storm. When he returned, she was doubled over in pain, her breath sharp and ragged. He set the bowl beside her, guided her toward the bed, and knelt. The fire flickered across his face, softening the hard lines time had carved there. Her cries broke the stillness. Then, like a miracle split from pain, the cry of a newborn filled the cabin. For a moment, neither of them moved. The baby's wails echoed against the wood beams, wild and pure. Ishta held her daughter to her chest, whispering words in her native tongue, soothing, sacred syllables that Cole did not understand but felt in his bones. "Ayoka," she murmured. "She brings happiness." When she finally looked at him, exhaustion painted her features, but gratitude glowed beneath. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved us." Cole shook his head. "You did the saving." He stared at the child, small and perfect, and something fragile stirred where loneliness had taken root. The silence that followed was heavy but not cold. It was the kind of quiet where two strangers begin to sense that they might share a destiny neither sought. By dawn, Ishta could barely stand, but she was determined to return to her people. She sat by the hearth, wrapped in a blanket he had given her, the baby asleep in her arms. Between sips of water, she told him what had happened: the raid, the fire, her husband's fall. Cole listened without interruption, his jaw tight. The story pulled something from him, a memory of the war years when he had held dying men in his arms, when mercy and horror had blurred together in the dust. When she finished, he rose and walked to the window. "You can't ride yet," he said quietly. "But when you can, I'll take you home." The road began at first light. Cole saddled his horse, wrapping a blanket for Ishta and tying a cradle to the side. She protested softly, but he only said, "You've come too far to walk the rest." They rode slow beneath the open sky, the plains rolling like waves of bronze. Sometimes she would hum, a song of rivers and old spirits, and he would listen, feeling the sound seep into the cracks of his silence. At noon, they rested by a stream. He washed the blood from her hands. She smiled faintly, though her eyes lingered on the horizon as if afraid it might vanish. That night they made camp under the stars. The baby slept between them, her tiny breaths lost in the whisper of wind. Cole stared into the fire. "You'll be safe soon," he said, almost to himself. After that, he didn't finish. She turned to him, her dark hair catching the light. "You live alone out here?" He nodded. "Since the war. Easier that way." She studied him in silence, then whispered, "No one chooses loneliness forever." The words hung there, trembling like embers. By the time they reached her tribe's valley, the air was thick with smoke from cooking fires. Riders appeared from the ridge, Comanche scouts. When they recognized Ishta, cries of joy rippled through the camp. Her father, Chief Tenna, came forward, his expression breaking from fear to relief as he embraced her. Cole stayed at the edge, awkward, dust-covered, uncertain. The chief turned to him, studying this stranger who had delivered his daughter and grandchild from death. Without words, he led a young stallion forward and offered the reins. Cole accepted with a nod. Gratitude didn't need translation. 4 days after, Cole lingered near the camp, fixing fences and helping where he could. The tribe watched him with cautious eyes at first, but respect grew quietly. Ishta visited often, her baby tied to her chest, her laughter returning in fragments. They would talk by the river, about the land, the stars, the things that haunt a person's heart. Cole told her of the cattle he once drove, the brothers he lost in the war. She listened, head tilted, her gaze unflinching. Sometimes she sang softly, the words older than memory, and he'd close his eyes, letting her voice fill the spaces where grief used to live. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, they sat by the water's edge. He had brought her wildflowers from the hills, simple blooms of blue and yellow. "They reminded me of you," he said, his voice rough with uncertainty. She smiled, surprised by the gentleness in his tone. "You think I'm like flowers?" "You grow where there's nothing," he replied. She didn't answer, but she tucked the flowers into her hair. The gesture, small and wordless, felt like a promise. When night fell, she leaned against him, and the rhythm of her breath matched his. He wanted to speak, to tell her what her presence had done to him, but silence seemed truer. The firelight danced across her face, and for the first time in years, he felt the world soften. The next dawn shattered peace. The sound of hooves thundered across the valley. Bandits, the same who had torn her world apart, swept down like a storm of dust and fire. Cole was the first to see them. He grabbed his rifle and ran toward the camp, shouting warnings. Panic erupted. Smoke curled into the sky. Arrows hissed past like angry wasps. He found Ishta near her tent, clutching her child. "Stay down," he shouted. She shook her head, tears streaking her face. "They killed my husband," she said, voice breaking. "Not again." He touched her shoulder, meeting her eyes. "Not this time." He fought with a fury born of purpose, every strike a vow. The battle roared across the valley. When it ended, the ground was scarred, the air thick with ash and silence. The bandits fled, leaving their dead behind. Cole stood at the center of it all, his breath ragged, his shirt torn and blood-stained. Ishta ran to him, her child still in her arms. "Cole!" she cried, and he turned just as his knees buckled. She caught him before he fell, pressing her forehead to his. "You're safe," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "You both are." His blood soaked into the earth, but he smiled as if he had never known peace until that moment. When he awoke, the world was soft and golden. Ishta sat beside him, the baby asleep nearby. Her fingers brushed his hair back, her eyes bright with relief. Around them, the tribe rebuilt. Children laughed again, the fires burned warm instead of wild. The chief approached, his face solemn but proud. "You fought like kin," he said. "You are kin." Cole tried to speak, but emotion caught in his throat. He looked at Ishta, and everything he could not say lived in that glance. Days turned to weeks. The tribe prepared for celebration, not of victory, but of new beginnings. One evening, as the sun sank low, Cole found Ishta by the river where they had once sat. She wore the same flowers he had given her, now woven fresh into her hair. "I never thanked you," she said softly. He smiled, shaking his head. You did, every time you smiled. Her laughter, quiet and trembling, drifted on the wind. My father wishes to see us joined before the tribe, she said. He says love that saves a life deserves a home. Cole stared at the water, watching it carry fragments of light downstream. And what do you say? He asked. She took his hand. I say the river flows the way it must. Their wedding was simple yet radiant. The entire tribe gathered under a sky painted in gold and violet. Drums pulsed like heartbeats, and voices rose in song. When Ishta placed her hand in Cole's, it felt less like ceremony and more like the completion of something that had begun long before either of them understood it. They kissed as the sun set, and for a moment the world seemed to pause, every sorrow, every exile, washed away in that single breath. That night they returned to the cabin where their story had begun. The baby slept in a cradle near the fire, the same fire that once witnessed pain now glowing with peace. Ishta hung a charm her father had given her, a feather bound in leather, above the doorway. Cole watched her, his chest tight with awe. It feels different, he said. She smiled. Because it's ours now. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. You think we'll be happy? She looked toward the plains, where the stars had begun to bloom. Happiness is like the wind, she said softly. You don't chase it. You let it find you. Outside, the night stretched endless and kind. The coyotes sang in the distance, and the river whispered secrets only lovers could hear. Inside, warmth replaced the silence that had once defined him. Cole lay beside her, listening to the soft breath of their child, the crackle of the fire, and the steady rhythm of her heart. In that quiet, he realized that love had not arrived with thunder or grand declarations. It had come gently, through mercy, through small acts of grace, through a knock on a lonely cabin door. Years later, the tale would be told again, around fires, in quiet whispers across the plains. Some would call it legend, others coincidence. But those who had seen it knew better. Love, they'd say, doesn't always gallop in with banners and songs. Sometimes it walks barefoot through dust and pain, asking only for shelter. And when you open the door, the world changes. So remember this, traveler, if you ever find yourself alone beneath the same wide sky, even in the darkest hour, a single light can lead you home. And sometimes that light wears a human face, gentle, weary, and waiting, like a cowboy once did for the girl who came to his cabin one haunted night and asked, through tears and courage, if he would help her bring new life into the world.